But now we're going to move into the last section for today, which is more about looking at our contribution to change. So understanding, we talked about how it's so complex, and maybe I made you guys feel like it's almost impossible to do M&E because it's so complex. But I want to reassure you with this last session of trying to understand the context and then your contribution to change, and focusing on how your NGO or your program is contributing to that change. And this primarily focuses on evaluation, but as we talked about previously, monitoring can lead to an evaluation. As monitoring can maybe be a flag of something is going wrong, and then you could then look and try to set up an evaluation later to try to understand what is exactly going wrong. But now we're thinking more evaluation in terms of reaching our goals. So we said that change is complex and messy. But sometimes it obviously did happen. We might see it in a certain landscape, but we might ask ourselves, was it because of our program? And if it was because of our program or other forces, how do we measure that? And that might be the even harder question to ask, and even harder than saying, okay, what did the change happen? And this is just an example here from Qinghai province, China, just an example to think about, where snow leopards were once attacked by feral dogs, as you can see in the above picture. But then we're imagining that the change we're moving towards is where there are no more of these attacks. And then we're trying to say, okay, was that because of our intervention in this landscape? Or what were the other causes that maybe created that change? And to do that, to understand our contribution, this is one approach that one can use, and it's called a force field analysis. I'm not sure if many of you are familiar with this approach, and it's about mapping the context of your setting and your intervention. So it's looking both in terms of the negative forces influencing the change. The change, remember, is your goal, is the final thing you're moving towards. What are the negative forces that might oppose that goal? And what are the positive forces that might be opposing? And this is thinking wider than just your program, thinking about the economics, the social situation, the policies, and so on in that region or locally or maybe in the country. So we've thought that it would be nice to actually go through this exercise together as a group, because then it kind of clarifies how we can look at contribution. And this is maybe an exercise that one could take home with you and do it your teams or at the community if it's appropriate. But we thought maybe might as well do the exercise together. So to do the exercise though, we picked a change we wanted to see, which is the first step, as we just did as a group, right? And the first question is, what is the change we want to see? And in this case, we're going to choose that Qinghai province, China, just because it's a little bit different. It's looking at feral dogs as a threat to snow leopards, and seeing, what needs to be done. And in this case, we might be thinking we want to eliminate feral dogs as a threat to snow leopards, and with no snow leopards being disturbed, and no snow leopards being killed by by feral dogs. The little caveat, it's very hard to measure that, I know. But that's just a small caveat that we'll just keep it at the back of our head. And of course, there might be other long-term changes you might want to keep in mind related to disease. That might be another kind of goal you have in mind. But if we just focus primarily on disturbance and killing of snow leopards from feral dogs in this example. So as a second step, we'd ask ourselves, what are the negative forces that are hindering or resisting this change? So in this case, it would be, for example, forces that exacerbate the threat of feral dogs to snow leopards. So when you do this, it's important to think of a given context. So it's hard when we do it hypothetically, because when you have an idea in mind, an area in mind, you can really think about who's involved, what stakeholders are involved, what's going on, the history of the place, and that really can inform what might influence and hinder this threat, such as policies, economic situations, social context. But I would still like to ask in this hypothetical form, what do you think are factors that could stop the progress of eliminating this threat? And if everyone can write in the chat if you have ideas. And there's no right or wrong answer because we're being hypothetical here. But please write in the chat what could be some things that could be influencing. Policy does not allow elimination of dogs. Okay. I'll try to make it a little bit smaller, but okay, any other ideas that come to mind? I'll just write a few here. Thanks, Ajay. Yeah, that would be a problem. Yeah, I mean, if the technique is to kill the dogs, then it'd be hard if policies don't allow that. So Ranjini is saying people support dog populations with people. Yeah, people support to feeding. Dog owners may not be happy without dogs. Yeah, you know, emotional attachment to dogs. Population increasing, community population increasing, or even dog population increasing. Lack of food waste disposals. Sorry, please, I know it's not the best formatting. I'll try to, there we go. Local community need dogs to protect livestock. Very good point, Becky. Could it be any bias in the case? Like, how can we see no slow leopard is killing? Or yes. So, I mean, that's a good point, Nilufar, that it's important to be able to measure to reach that goal. So we could think about some indicators that kind of allow us to measure towards that, but that would be important to think about when you're thinking about measuring that change. We'll go into like indicators and measuring in the next session, Nilufar. So hopefully we'll be able to answer some of those questions. Animals' rights and NGOs. NGOs, protecting culling, yeah. Lack of expertise, yeah, really nice, Jennifer. Capacity, expertise. Yeah, and I see a lot. So, I mean, we've gone, my slide isn't the best slide. So we've kind of gone along, but these are all really great examples. And I think they capture the local setting, which might be taking place, but also related to capacities, related to the systems in place, management systems in place, to the community's social and well-being, as well to their economic situation, the population. So that it's trying to really capture many forces at play. So not just conservation, not just, you know, not just having us think about conservation in isolation in that vacuum. We're trying to really think of it with these other processes in place. So I tried to here list a few of these that you have all listed and many of you have built on, so which are just further examples. So once we've done that and understand what might be hindering this change, as we just did, the next step would be to think about, okay, what is our program doing? We have a specific program, and how is what processes is our program addressing? for example, in the hindering processes. In this case, our program could be improving a waste management community program, if that's our specific program in this community. So it's helping reduce waste. It's also maybe has an education aspect, which is about the lessons of feeding dogs or other aspects in terms of trying to gain community support for reducing feral dog population numbers. So in that case, then we would look, okay, amongst these hindering aspects, what are we contributing to? And then this is just a hypothetical situation where we're actually targeting food waste management, the feeding of wildlife, and maybe we might also be targeting social norms if we link our program with other community conservation programs in the area, which is about building support for snow leopards more directly, such as an insurance program or corral program, which addresses the way we think about snow leopards in this landscape. So we might then look at this, and then we would do this. So that's the first few steps. The second step is to look at this in the same way, but looking at the positive forces. What would be favoring this change, favoring the impact of our program we're working towards? And we're not going to do that together because I'm more mindful of time. But I just listed here a few. Some of them are repetitions of what the hindering forces are, and they're just written in a positive way, but they might even go wider, related to a community garbage management program, policies for feral dog management, maybe religious groups are engaged and become supportive of the program. So again, many aspects, and as wide as you can think, that might be supporting this change. And again, in this case, you ask again, what is your program's contribution? What is your program focusing on? And maybe thinking about the highest areas of highest leverage that your program could focus on to create this change. And in our case might be related to improved waste management and community engagement. So essentially, the example, we won't go into it for too much further, but in the example is to bring this all together and it's just a powerful exercise to place your conservation program in this bigger picture. So it allows us to start mapping out where we're working in this complex world, given the political, economic, social, and other factors at play, but also helps us really map out the context which we're working on and our specific garbage program or our specific program or many programs that might be working together and how they're all contributing. And when we're doing it today as a group, we all work in very different landscapes and very different projects. So it's hard to get to the specifics. But when you work with your team that really understand the local context, the situation, it can get really interesting to think and get different people's perspectives on what's going on. And this is a really nice participatory way also to not just get your conservation kind of mindset on what's going on, but maybe you invite government personnel to also give their views or other community members, and people can start bringing different pieces of the puzzle together to then understand the contribution of your program, but also the context where you're working. So it's called the force field exercise, and it feeds in to something that we're going to talk about in the next two sessions, which is called the theory of change. So the theory of change helps us identify how to plan our programs as well to create that change. So it's more than just the indicators of seeing that change, because before the indicators, you need to have a specific plan of how you get there. So it helps us define then how to monitor that change with measurable indicators. And it also helps us bring us attention to these wider forces at play that we might also need to monitor. Because when we monitor our programs in isolation, again, it might be very, it might not capture the real situation. So we might think in our monitoring programs that we might need to monitor these wider forces taking place as well to understand our contribution. So when it is done simply and together as a team, it can be powerful in promoting understanding about your program and incorporate other understandings of the project design. Because assessing impact of your program is almost impossible, not only without understanding the change you're going for, but without a really clear strategy of your program. And I know conservation organizations often find themselves working in trial and error. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. That can be, you know, very good in terms of understanding the context and building relationships with local people when there are other goals. But it does make monitoring and evaluation extremely difficult because you don't really know where you're going and how you're going there, which and you have to have a really adaptive approach. So that's just something to think about, understanding your clear strategy in your program. And we often call it the missing middle or the missing conservation middle. And it is about how you get there, your conservation strategy. And it really relates to context, especially in community conservation programs, and in hoping to succeed in that specific context with those wider forces at play. So we call it that miracle happening. But what is that miracle? It's about laying out that realistic plan of what's happening and where you want to go with your program. And that miracle, we also can be termed as the theory of change. And it's really the core of all evaluation programs. And it's talking about it, and we'll talk about it in more detail in the next session. But just to give you a little taste, we often think about, it's more than just our planned activities. So we often think about, okay, our programs are doing this, so we lead to automatically to that change with time going by. But a theory of change is more than that. It's thinking, okay, what are our activities doing and what are they leading to lead to that change? And what are the wider processes also at play? So it's more than activities. And it really helps us gain more clarity about what is happening in the process and can maybe lead to more realistic timelines. Because without this clarity, we might assume the change will happen next year when it's actually in 10 years. But the real question is whether our programs are designed in a way that is actually bringing about change in that context. And then this is through a theory of change. And with this theory of change, we're not saying it needs to stay the same. It can adapt. It can constantly change based on new information incorporated and so on, and be really adaptable, especially in community conservation. I think that's something that we'll keep highlighting needs to be done. But when you think about theory of change, these are the kind of questions we can always go back to, which we touched upon today. So what is the change you want to see? What has to be in place to reach that change, the success factors, the external factors, which we did in the recent exercise of the force fields. And then what is your role as your organization that we also did during the force field exercise? And what does progress look like? And what are other assumptions that you have about the wider system taking place? So James is going to look at this in much more detail in session 3. And we're going to work towards that in session 2, focusing on indicators and other aspects of participatory ways to collect this information or do this work. But for today, we wanted to leave you with this because I think we've covered quite a lot in the last in this last 2 hours, and we're almost at the end of time, but I'm going to pass it on back to Juliette because we hope we've left you with a kind of introduction to M&E and where we're going to build on for the next sessions, but we can always adapt the following sessions. So over to you, Juliette.
Thank you, Justine. So the question that we'd like to ask you just in the last sort of 10 minutes is really over the course of this very short session today, what has really stuck with you? What are the sort of key things that you're taking away? So it could be things that you've learned. It could be things that you'd like to explore more. It could be questions that remain unanswered, etc. And for us, it's really useful to have that insight from you so that we can potentially try and address some of these issues in the course of the 3-week course, but also just to see really, how this particular MNE course can be improved in the future, etc. We will also, just as a quick aside, we will also, after this session today, send you a little link just to a questionnaire, just to see, how you felt this session went. But just for now, in the last 10 minutes, it would be great with, again, Mentimeter, just for you to maybe put up, what are the key things that stuck with you from our discussion this morning. So hopefully everyone's still able to use Mentimeter and it's still working, it's all fine. You can also do it on your telephone if you prefer. Is that right, Justine? You just go to www.menti.com and use the code that's up here on the slide. Yeah. So if that's easier, then go for it. So the headline. Oh, well, that's great that was an activity that you found useful. Yeah, absolutely. So really thinking of that headline as a way to focus in on what change you want to see. So the difference, so I'm not quite, with MNE difference. The difference between monitoring and evaluation. Yeah, absolutely, because it is one that we can make. Although this group was particularly good at deciphering the difference between monitoring and evaluation. So I'm not sure that's really one that is that important. I know. Yeah, that's really good. So the force fields and the factors, the sort of positive and negative factors that can impact on one's activity, the complexity of it, and of course the level of control that one has on all these external factors as well, and the fact that the context changes, absolutely. There's also this issue of the time frame, so the sort of long-term time frame, and responsiveness versus MNE. Okay, great.
Yeah, I think that's related to Ajay's example.
Yes, the fact that indicators, for example, can change over time, etc. Yes, and the fact that we have to be very responsive to things, and that also came up in an example in our breakout group, actually, where a new threat appeared, which was mining, which obviously then changes the way in which you're going to do your monitoring and evaluation as well. Okay, this is brilliant. So scaling the evaluation, yeah, context, of course, and involvement of different actors, especially when we're talking about this more sort of participatory MNE aspect. I'm finding the yellow particularly hard to read. That's probably just because I'm getting old. Okay, so this is really excellent.
Context, involvement, and ongoing yellow.
Okay, thank you, Justine. Like I'm being helped on something I really shouldn't need help on. Okay, so that's really great. That's really, really good. This is all really lovely, and I'm really glad to see that the headline exercise got quite a bit of mentions, and of course, yes, a lot of grey areas, right? I mean, monitoring and evaluation, like everything in conservation, it's not black and white. It's going to have some really complicated, complex grey areas where it's difficult to make head or tail of what's happening. So that's really wonderful. I like that a lot. I really like this issue of, well, some of the activities that worked a lot, but also, some of the aspects that we need to be aware of in MNE, like control, like the time frame, like the grey nature of it, etc., etc. So that's brilliant. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so we also We almost tried to do the force field exercise as a breakout room, but thought it would be a total disaster online.
It could have been a bit more difficult.
But hopefully it's something we can do in person one day. But I don't know if anyone has questions, Juliet. Should we open the last 4 minutes?
Yes, exactly. We've got that was what I was going to suggest, actually. We've got a few more minutes. So if there are any specific questions, let us know. Bearing in mind that in the evaluation sheet that we send you, there is room, am I right, Ajay, for comments, etc. So if there are any questions that you want to ask us, you can also use that evaluation sheet. So we're going back to that in a very practical way. But if there are any questions now, then please feel free. No, it seems either everyone's happy or they're waiting for the evaluation sheet to come along. So I think, Ajay, will you be sending that?
I will be sending that, either me or Justine, but one of us will. Maybe
Wonderful.
people are just hoping to have a cup of coffee.
Yes, I know. I am as well.
Given us a break this time, so maybe that's the
No, it's true. Normally we do go for a break, but we decided with 2 hours that we would survive. Okay, well, that's a very good point, and I'm sure people will be going for various, I don't know, lunch, dinners, breakfasts, etc., as we're spread out across the world. So I think maybe we'll close there for today. So we'll see you all same time next week. It's been really great to have you all here with us today. We'll be sending that evaluation sheet. Please feel free to be as honest and open in it as you like. Also, if you want to just email us directly, that's fine as well. And otherwise, yes, we'll see you this time next week.
Yeah, and we'll bring in many examples next week. So if you have examples, please come in. We're focusing on monitoring. If you have examples from the snow leopard world, we'd love to have your input so we can share more about experiences, how everyone's doing monitoring throughout the range, right, Juliet?
Yeah, absolutely.
We don't really know what we're doing, but we kind of know. Anyway, thanks, Juliet. Thanks.
We're adaptable. We're adaptable, Justine.
Yeah, please send me back what we could do, what you want to do. Okay, thanks, Juliet. Thanks, Ajay.
Thank you, Ajay. Thanks, Justine. And thank you to our facilitators and all our participants. Okay, see you next week. Bye.